Having been a massive Berserk fan, going with the Barbarian was the natural choice for me in Diablo 4 Season 8. And not only that, I wanted to take on the main character of Berserk's fantasy of bashing things as much as I could. So that's why I went with Hammer of the Ancients for Season 8. And while Whirlwind was kind of enticing, especially with the new boss powers and the Belial's eye beams helping out Whirlwind greatly and with it receiving buffs, while I did actually begin the season with Whirlwind, Hammer of the Ancients has been great for me, not only because it just feels a lot more fun, especially given the fantasy of this Berserk character, but also I found that and was pleasantly surprised by how viable this build actually is. Even though the speed farming capabilities may not be necessarily like as good as Whirlwind's, but a single target can definitely be a lot better. And also you can pivot and have many different variants to the build, such as by incorporating something like Steel Grasp, using like Call of the Ancients, and you can even incorporate Earthquake very much so into this build and really make it S tier for the late game. And with that, just kind of going through what I have and recommend for the Hammer of the Ancients build so far. And again, there are many different ways you could play this, and also many different skills you could swap out. And I think with how the boss drops or the boss ladder is in Season 8, how you progress your characters can actually very much depend on the good uniques or like the good rolls on uniques that you get. Looking at the skills, I am very much relying on Combat Bash, because as long as you have a pretty good crit chance and you critical strike 4 times with Bash, make sure you have a two-handed weapon bound to it. You actually have a guaranteed overpower on your next core skill. So what you can do with like boss killing is you make sure to proc this and then you stack all of your other buffs, such as like War Cry. I'll show you how you can stack like an Earthquake onto it to give you extra damage too with the aspect, and so on and so forth. And also like Steel Grasp if you're using Ancient's Oath like I am. Anyhow, there are lots of ways you can just stack damage and just like kill bosses in like a couple of hits. So that's like a really cool thing about this build, although it does require some setting up. But you can really just keep bashing and then rinsing and repeating your Hammer of the Ancients to deal decent DPS anyway, without like necessarily having to time everything together. So I would say this is a lot more forgiving than Mighty Throw still. It's a lot more spammable, I think. But again, Mighty Throw is gonna have like a really high ceiling for single target damage, but that's not really what this video is about anyway. So anyhow, moving on to the rest of my skills, of course I have Hammer of the Ancients maxed out with Furious Hammer of the Ancients, so this can actually help knock down enemies too and give you increased crit strike damage and crit strike chance, which is really strong. And the knocking down helps with survivability too and can like stagger bosses quite a lot. You also want to have some overpower in your build or overpower damage. Some of these are also by preference, so I have Pressure Point here just to give me a bit more chance to apply vulnerable, but alternatively you could also get a roll on your rings to have a lucky hit to apply vulnerable. That's also quite good. Moving on, my other main skills are Rallying Cry. Some people like to run Challenging Shout, that's also okay. I do have War Cry. Some people also prefer maxing out War Cry, that's definitely really strong too. And having the Berserking from War Cry is really strong, and yet another damage multiplier you can use whenever you're overpowering with your Hammer of the Ancients. And next, a lot of these passives are just very standard, some nice multipliers and such. I also have Steel Grasp. I think it's actually quite strong because you're pulling enemies in, grouping them together, and then smashing them with the Hammer of the Ancients, so I think the synergy there is really good. And it's also because I've happened to found a decent Ancient's Oath, also with really high cooldown reduction. So this is a big reason that I'm currently using Steel Grasp. So again, a lot of what you choose as you progress may depend on the uniques that you find and whether your rolls are good on, whichever uniques you get. Next, for the ultimate, I like Call of the Ancients. This is actually really strong. They do a lot of damage on their own, and the cooldown is super low once you've maxed it out, and I have a decent amount of cooldown reduction, again thanks to like my weapon here partially, and also I have a tempering on my amulet to help with that too. But alternatively, some people like to run Berserk, or Wrath of the Berserker rather, and you could go with like Ugly Bastard's Helm. Although the explosion from casting Wrath of the Berserker is not like the most important, what you want here is actually for the increased fire damage. If you're going to be comboing your build with more earthquakes, right? But that's more of like a later game variant, or again, if you actually find those aspects earlier, you could do that version too. Because you actually need the unique chest piece called Mantle of Mountain's Fury, which I haven't gotten just yet, but that will allow your Hammer of the Ancients to detonate earthquakes, and so scaling up earthquake damage makes a lot more sense after you get that. And not only that, but you need to have a reliable way to proc earthquakes to be able to use the earthquake variant. What I have right now is Igni Tech. So again, Tech is the rune you'll be using to invoke or proc earthquakes, but the way to proc it, you'll have to have a reliable way. One common way that players will use to proc earthquakes is using the Moni Rune of Ritual, which I don't yet have. Instead of that, I currently have Igni, which is also decent. It basically stores offering automatically whenever I'm not casting, so it's like a decent trickle of offering. You can also use Zan if you have low enough cooldown on your Call of the Ancients or ultimate skill. Anyhow, rounding out my skills, again, max this out, standard passives, and for my key passive, I have Unbridled Rage. Back to gear really quick. Again, some of this might have some potential to be better optimized, but I would say for the current Hammer of the Ancients variant, before pivoting to more of an Earthquake variant, which I plan to do for higher Torment tiers and pit levels, although you could still roll with Hammer of the Ancients with less of a focus on Earthquake related aspects too if you really wanted to, it's still tier 4 or Torment 4 viable, and it's still like a decent build. Although the reason I intend to pivot to more of an Earthquake focused build with more Earthquake Paragon as well as aspects is that Earthquake is actually a highly powerful like S tier build right now. So I kind of want to go for that. But again, going more Hammer of the Ancients heavy is also viable. Anyhow, for the current iteration that I have, for Hammer of the Ancients, the core aspects that you want are the Ancestral Force aspect, because this will allow your Hammer of the Ancients to have a larger area and give you a little bit of multiplicative damage. And not only that, but it'll deal extra damage even on top of that against bosses. So this is part of what makes your hammers do a lot of damage against bosses, on top of all the overpowering you'll be doing. For some other good aspects, anger management is really strong. Even though you're losing Fury, I would say that Fury is usually not that big of a problem. If it is, you can use like Elixir of Resourcefulness to help with that. And I also am using the Lum Rune to restore resource. It just gives you like however much resource. And then for what I use to trigger it, I just use Seer, which is just casting like 5 of any skill to store up a bunch of offerings. So every few skills that I cast, I roughly will just fill up my Fury to full. Moving on, the other aspects that you can use are just more flexible. Edge Masters is pretty good. It's just whenever you're filling up your Fury or how consistently you can do that, you'll do more damage the higher the Fury you have when you're casting, right? Limitless Rage is also pretty good. This one is actually really strong too, the Earthquakes aspect. If you're doing any bosses, even just spawning the first Earthquake or a couple of Earthquakes will give you like significant multiplicative damage just standing in an Earthquake to give you yet another multiplier. But besides this, a lot of the other aspects, the offensive ones, can just be kind of flex picks. Just look for ones like, again, like Edge Masters or even like Inner Calm, which is the one that gives you damage when you're standing still. That gives you like a 15 to 20% multiplier. So just like generalist offensive aspects are good. And aside from that, for defense, you can always run Might, that's very reliable. But once you get the unique chest, Mantle of Mountain's Fury, you can swap to that. For pants, people suggest using Tybalt's Will for an extra stackable multiplier. Currently, I'm just using like some Juggernaut defensive pants for some extra armor as I'm going through the Torment tiers. For my helm, I would suggest going for the Ugly Bastard. Am I allowed to say this on YouTube? Helm. This is more of a standard choice for most players because all your damage is converted to fire whenever you're berserking, regardless of whether you're using Wrath of the Berserker, and you're just dealing like a huge multiplier whenever you are berserking. And quickly going through some of the more earthquake focused aspects, so I would swap over some of my current aspects for these. Would be, again, I will already have the aspect of the earthquakes because it does synergize with Hammer of the Ancients quite well. But some of the other ones you can consider using are Executioner's Aspect, because this will spawn additional earthquakes, and if you have the unique chest Mantle of Mountain Sphere, you can detonate multiple earthquakes at once, so this is a crucial one to have. Incendiary Fissures is also going to be really strong because it just scales up your earthquake damage by a tremendous amount. You can also use Aspect of Elements for another pretty high multiplier. Then the Vehement Brawler's Aspect is also really strong because it's just like a great multiplier to have if you have low enough cooldown reduction on your ultimate skill, whether it be Call of the Ancients or Wrath of the Berserker. For more consistent shout upkeep, and just like say War Cry and Rallying Cry, and if you run Challenging Shout, the uptime on these, you could definitely also consider running Bold Chieftain's Aspect to reduce their cooldowns, putting that on a ring. And onto boss powers really quick. For the mainly Hammer of the Ancients variant, you'll generally want to use Grigor's Lightning Square because it'll proc whenever you are using a core skill. And really what it is just a way for you to proc all of your modifiers, which is really where you're getting your multiplicative damage and benefits, right? So you can think of the main boss power as like the vehicle for that. So you're usually picking the one where you can proc the most, which is generally Grigor's Lightning Square for Hammer of the Ancients. Alternatively though, if you swap over to, or if you find yourself casting like Bash or like Lunging Strike, if you decide to use that for like a more of an Earthquake build later on, if you use basic skills a bit more than your Hammer of the Ancients, you can also consider Alex Talons for your main boss power. Again, it's more of just like a vehicle for proccing your other, modifiers down here. So for Hammer of the Ancients, Belial's Eye Beam is really strong because it gives you extra overpower damage. Taurus Rage is just good, actually generally good because it gives you like attack speed. It can be good for like other variants too, or other builds. Hatred's Embrace Haste is strong because it gives you critical strike chance, and it can actually give you a huge amount of crit strike. As you can see, I have 50% of a bonus because it increases whenever you have like, or for each shadow resistance that you have, which I have a lot. This is actually really powerful. Also, if you're swapping over to like an Earthquake variant, you could use some other like multipliers such as Flesh Reapers. This is just generally good as well for vulnerable damage. And then Blackmailers is actually an interesting one, especially if you need survivability, because it gives you barrier whenever you fortify, and it's actually quite a lot of barrier. And then lastly here, for mostly an Earthquake build, Cinnarod's Flames is really strong because it gives you a large multiplier for elemental damage, because whenever you, well, also with the Ugly Bastard's Helm, you'll be able to deal like elemental damage, and this will scale that up quite a bit as well. And of course, Lilith's Winds of Hate is also really good. As you can see, I don't yet have it, otherwise I would be running it over one of these two modifiers here. But it procs a lot, but you would rather use the modifier power to chip away percentages of Elite's life. And that is my current iteration and recommendations for the Berserk Hammer of the Ancients Barbarian build for Season 8. Again, there are tons of ways you could actually run this. For example, I'm currently intending on pivoting more to an Earthquake heavy build. Anyhow, let me know what you think in the comment section below. I'll be sure to answer all comments. And also, if you liked the video, consider smashing the like button and subscribing to my channel for more. Anyhow, with that, thank you so much for watching, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace and happy hunting.